Right now, if something goes wrong inside your body, you have options. You call a doctor, you drive to a clinic, you swallow a pill that took decades of research to develop. But for most of human history, none of that existed. No hospitals, no antibiotics, no diagnosis. Just a sick person, a group of people who desperately needed them, and whatever knowledge had been passed down through generations of trial and error. So what did they actually do? The answer is stranger, smarter, and more disturbing than almost anything modern medicine wants to admit. Let's start with what we can prove. In 1991, hikers in the Alps discovered a frozen body in a melting glacier. They called him Otzi. He was 5,300 years old, and he is the most well-preserved human being ever found from that era. Scientists have spent decades studying every inch of him. And what they found changed how we think about ancient medicine entirely. Otzi had intestinal parasites, specifically whipworm, a painful, debilitating infection that would have caused severe cramping and weakness. But he also had something else. Attached to his clothing were 2 lumps of a fungus called birch polypore. Scientists initially assumed they were practical. Fire-starting material? Maybe. Then they tested it. Birch polypore contains active compounds with antiparasitic properties. Otzi wasn't carrying it by accident. He was medicating himself. 5,000 years before antibiotics, a man walking through the Alps knew which fungus to eat for a parasite infection in his gut. He didn't learn that from a textbook. He learned it from someone who learned it from someone else, going back further than we can trace. That transmission of knowledge is the real story. Before writing, before cities, before anything we'd recognize as civilization, humans were building something invisible. A pharmaceutical library carried entirely inside human memory, passed from healer to healer across hundreds of thousands of years. And it worked. A 2017 study published in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology analyzed 115 plant-based remedies used by indigenous healers across different continents that had never had contact with each other. The same plants, the same conditions, the same preparations, independent groups of humans, separated by oceans and millennia, had arrived at the same medical conclusions through observation alone. Your ancestors were running clinical trials. They just didn't call them that. But knowledge alone wasn't enough, because when someone got sick in a small hunter-gatherer group, the stakes were immediately existential. These groups typically ranged from 20 to 50 people. Every single person had a role. The man who could track animals by a broken stem, the woman who knew which roots were edible and which ones killed, the elder who remembered where the water source was during last season's drought. Lose one person at the wrong time and the entire group's survival shifted. This is why ancient humans didn't just treat illness physically, they treated it socially. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer groups, the Hadza in Tanzania, the Kung in the Kalahari, the Tsimane in Bolivia, have documented the same pattern across all of them. When someone gets sick, the group reorganizes. Hunting schedules change. Food is redistributed. Someone stays behind. The sick person is never left alone. This wasn't sentimentality. This was strategy. A person who recovers is a person whose knowledge, skills, and relationships survive. Abandoning the sick wasn't the norm. It was the absolute last resort. And the people doing the healing weren't just caregivers. They were specialists. Every culture in human history, without a single exception, developed a role for someone whose job was to understand illness and intervene in it. We call them shamans now, but that word barely captures what they actually were. The shaman was the group's physician, psychologist, pharmacologist, and surgeon combined. They spent years, sometimes their entire lives, learning plant properties, wound management, bone setting, and the psychological architecture of fear and pain. Because in ancient medicine, the physical and the psychological were never separated. They were understood to be the same thing. Modern science is now catching up to that understanding. The placebo effect is real and measurable. When a person believes they are being treated by someone with authority and knowledge, their body actually responds differently. Cortisol drops, immune function improves, pain perception decreases. The ritual of healing, the confidence of the healer, the presence of the group, all of it produces measurable physiological change. Ancient healers didn't know the mechanisms, but they had tens of thousands of years of observation telling them the ritual mattered, so they kept doing it. Now here's where it gets darker. Not every illness could be handled with plants and ritual. Some injuries were catastrophic, and what ancient humans did about those injuries is extraordinary. In 2020, archaeologists in Borneo uncovered a skeleton estimated to be 31,000 years old. The left leg was missing its lower section. Not broken off, not separated by decay, surgically removed, the bone had been deliberately cut with a sharp instrument, and then it had healed. The person survived the amputation and lived for years afterward. This is the oldest known surgical procedure ever recorded. Think about what that required. Someone made a decision. Someone held the patient still. Someone cut cleanly and quickly enough to prevent death from blood loss. And then someone managed that wound for weeks, keeping it clean, preventing fatal infection, keeping the patient alive long enough for bone to begin regenerating. All of that 31,000 years ago in Borneo with stone tools. Trepanation makes modern people even more uncomfortable. Trepanation is the deliberate cutting of a hole in a living person's skull. It is the oldest surgical procedure with the widest geographic distribution in the entire archaeological record. Some show multiple procedures on the same individual, and critically, many of them show bone regrowth around the hole. The patients survived. Repeatedly. Scientists now believe ancient surgeons used trepanation to treat severe head trauma, chronic migraines, and conditions we would recognize today as seizure disorders or severe mental illness. Whether drilling into someone's skull actually resolved those conditions is a separate debate. What is not debatable is that people were performing precision skull surgery tens of thousands of years ago, and their patients were living through it. None of this was painless, and ancient humans knew that. Archaeological evidence of deliberate medicinal plant use stretches back hundreds of thousands of years. Willow bark, which contains salicin, the active compound in modern aspirin, has been found at Neanderthal burial sites. Evidence of opium poppy use goes back at least 8,000 years. Cannabis as medicine appears in Chinese records from 2700 BCE, but the most remarkable find came from Shanidar Cave in Iraq. Buried with a Neanderthal skeleton were concentrated pollen deposits from 8 different flowering plants: yarrow, groundsel, ephedra, and several others. Most of them are still used medicinally today. Someone gathered those flowers deliberately and placed them with the body. Neanderthals were not our species. They were a separate branch of humanity that went extinct roughly 40,000 years ago, and they were burying their sick and their dead with medicine. Care for the ill didn't begin with civilization. It began before us. Here's what all of this actually means. Modern medicine likes to frame itself as the starting point. The moment humans finally figured out how to handle disease, everything before it gets filed under superstition and ignorance. The archaeological record doesn't support that. What it shows is an unbroken chain. A surgeon in Borneo making a decision that any modern orthopedic specialist would recognize. A man in the Alps self-medicating with a fungus that genuinely worked. Communities reorganizing their entire survival structure around one sick person because they understood, practically and completely, that knowledge is irreplaceable. They didn't have our vocabulary. They didn't have our instruments, but they had something that doesn't appear in any medical journal. They had hundreds of thousands of years of paying attention. And underneath all of it, underneath the surgery and the plants and the rituals and the healer who stayed up all night watching someone breathe, was one idea so old it predates language itself. That a sick person was worth saving. Not because morality demanded it, because it was simply true. The person burning with fever in the dark knew something, had built something, was carrying knowledge that would die with them if no one intervened. They understood what we keep being forced to rediscover. That medicine was never just about the body. It was always about keeping the group whole. And somewhere inside the part of you that still checks on the people you love when they go quiet, that understanding is still running. Older than any hospital, older than any word we have for it. Still there, still working.